Home Trust is proud to partner with Blue Door as a sponsor of the Coolest Night of the Year walk in Richmond Hill. At Home Trust, we believe that all Canadians deserve a place to call home. As a leading financial service provider that aspires to help Canadians achieve home ownership and prosper, we are committed to supporting at-risk and vulnerable people in our community by working with organizations such as Blue Door. At Home Trust, we take the time to listen to our customers and offer the best financing options based on their unique situations. From our headquarters in downtown Toronto to our offices in Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Halifax, Home Trust is dedicated to helping Canadians from all walks of life reach their financial goals and save for the future. You can find out more by visiting our website at www.hometrust.ca.
Welcome, Housers, to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite, from the great organization of Blue Door, where I work with many, many people much, much smarter than I am, who are doing incredible work across the top of the GTA, in York Region, Durham, and Peel Region, whether it be helping people find emergency housing, transitional housing, housing for 2S LGBTQ plus youth. That's amazing. That's pet friendly. Whether it's our construction social enterprise in Durham, Peel, or York, that are launching people into the trades and pulling them out of poverty and helping bring in revenue so we can actually build housing and add programs not on the backs of government, or if it's linking them to healthcare where they can get healthy and move forward with their housing journey. We do all that and more. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. Just take out your phone and use that QR code. It will link you directly to it. Be part of the solution. Check out our Mosaic Interfaith Out of the Cold program. That's seasonal, has been running for over 20 years, and it's been saving lives for over 20 years. We don't do this podcast alone. We do it with our friends at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Hey, check out this shirt here. Homelessness is solvable. I got this through the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. It's just a piece of one of their advocacy campaigns. They do many, and they have the ear of government, and they've made so many things change over time for the better. They are leading the way and pointing the government in the right direction. They do advocacy work across our country and much, much more. They do training. Check out their website at caeh.ca. And of course, they run the massive conference they do each fall next year to be held in Ottawa. It is a one-of-a-kind, wonderful awareness and education building conference where they bring together the biggest minds out of housing and homelessness from around the world together to share. So check that out. Again, hey, let's talk about today's guest. We talk about homelessness on this podcast. We also talk about deeply affordable housing. Home ownership is part of that. And right now, when you think we're in 2024, if you're looking to buy a home and you have an income of $100,000, $120,000, that is great. It's great. And what that gets you the GTA right now is a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, maybe. Right? But if you have a dream of owning a home, maybe you're a new Canadian that's come in, and part of that Canadian dream is owning a home, it is next to impossible unless you have wonderful organizations like Trillium Housing. And that's who we have today. We have Joe Deschênes Smith is on, one of the principals at Trillium Housing. I think he started with 3 partners. It's just him now because they've retired. Joe continues to work on and they have placed so many families and single parents in deeply affordable ownership. And they do that. And he comes on, he talks about the model. He talks about his journey. Joe spent some time in politics. He was chief of staff for municipal affairs a while back. And he's done all sorts of different work that led him to affordable housing, that led him to really roll the dice. He had started with $0 and just helped to build up Trillium Housing so they're able to do different projects. And they've done hundreds of homes in Hamilton, in Pickering, and Winona, just different spots. And then many of those homes, what they do is they work with families so they don't have to qualify for as much of a mortgage by providing a Trillium mortgage, and makes it deeply affordable for them because they don't pay any interest on that Trillium mortgage. They just pay that back when and if they sell the home. right? So it's a different way of looking at things. As you know, on this podcast, we're always looking at new, cool, and innovative methods of getting people into housing of all sorts. This qualifies as one of those. We talk about that and much, much more. We talk about the future of Trillium Housing, how you can apply, what needs to change with the Canadian landscape. It's a fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's go to that conversation now. Week on the podcast, another great guest on the way home. Joe, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's so happy to be here. And you know what? I'm going to start off by thanking you, Michael, for having this podcast, because there's not a lot of places for us, as you put it, housers to go and talk about affordable housing. And I know pre-call you said you've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, and we need this. And I really, I think I'm not alone in saying thank you for doing this. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thanks for that, Joe. I'll tell you something. And I've told this story a couple times, but when I first was asked, a friend of mine who runs the pod plant, Mike Wixon, had said to me, "So why don't you do a podcast around housing homelessness?" And I said, I don't really understand podcasts, right? And so I went home, asked my kids, and they said, of course, like we don't listen to traditional radio anymore. Podcasting is a great way. And they said, by the way, we would never listen to it, but number one, because it's you. Number two, because it's pretty sector specific. So yeah, and we started doing it. And listen, we've now between Out of the Blue, the predecessor to this, and this one, I think we've had probably 250 podcasts. And so we never run out of amazing people like yourself to talk to. It's been incredible. And I nerd out over this because I just learn stuff every week, whether it's someone who's lived it and wrote about it or lived it and now is doing different things, or someone who has unique solutions to different things like yourself. And we're going to talk more about that. Before we get to drilling down on your work at Trillium, we got to ask you the question we ask everyone. There's no right or wrong. It's personal to you. And that is, what does home mean to you?
All right. So I watched your podcast. I knew this was coming. So here, see this? It's nice. That's the house that I grew up in North Bay. My cousin did that painting for my mother several years ago. And that's where I played street hockey out front. And we had an ice rink in the backyard. It was up in North Bay. It was cold enough back then where you could have an outdoor ice rink for the whole winter. And, it's the place where a child becomes an adult. It's the place where, you learn how to become a parent. It's the place where, hopefully you're a grandparent and you dote on those children. And that's that, I knew this question was coming. I thought, I've got that picture of my family house, where I grew up, and I'm going to put that up.
Yeah. And what you're saying, like every time you look at that picture, it's that feeling that evokes of home, right? I think that's most people never say it's they point out all the physical features of a home. It's just really about, this is how it makes me feel. I feel safe, feel comfortable. And it reminds me of childhood or family and those types of things. So wonderful. Let's learn a little bit about you and your journey into this work. We often learn that most people, when it came to career day and people came in to talk about things you could do when you were younger, no one said, I want to go into housing, or I'm going to, really new, but somehow they found their way into this work. Can you talk us through your journey?
Yeah, I never thought of housing, but I don't know if I ever thought of what specific job I would do. But my family was very much involved in public life, let's say. My dad was an MPP, and my sister ended up being one, and my mom was a nurse and did lots of volunteer. I think I always knew I was going to be doing something that would have a positive, social value, giving back. I've spent some time working at Queen's Park in ministers' offices, which I think is part of that. I grew up Catholic, and I think my faith inspires me to want to help others. I think those were really, those were the genesis, and then my career, going from an MBA and then doing some work in some private education, working a couple of times in the healthcare center and in research, and then eventually in some politics, and then ended up doing some stuff related to affordable housing, starting with a chief of staff job at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs here in Ontario. and at a time when the McGuinty government was moving a lot of public policy and legislative freight through. So, I was there for the City of Toronto Act, the new building code at that time, a new planning act, the reforms to the landlord and tenant legislation. So we did a lot of stuff, and it exposed me. And I thought, well, there's a lot more to be done. And I was inspired to go out and do more in that field.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people that come through politics, whether it's on the staffing side or the political side of things, I heard someone say I'm a survivor of because it's like when you're in it, there must be a huge adrenaline rush, but especially as chief of staff, I mean, the work just never stops. The needs are ever changing, and it is just punishing that type of work. So,
yeah, but you got to rely on other people. You're not doing it all yourself. So, in our office, there was, Richard Joy, who's with ULI now, and I don't know if you've talked to him or their organization, but he did the City of Toronto Act, not me. And Utili Amaral, who did the Planning Act work. These are people that continue to be active in public life in various ways, and I think share that same kind of sentiment that I have, and like some of your other guests, probably had. They did some work in the public field, and then have shifted into nonprofit and other organizations, but they're continuing to deliver that mission.
And let's talk about the work that you're doing now. You mentioned when we were talking behind the scenes, 10 years ago, something happened. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Trillium Housing has reached its decade of achievement, so it's really exciting. I had two partners when we launched Trillium, Richard Owen and Fred Heller. They've both since retired. But we were involved in housing and had been for a few years in various enterprises. And I'd say, I'll give you a little story. I would go to meetings of ONFA, Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association. But the organization I was also a member of BUILD. So that's the land industry organization in the GTA. And I wouldn't recognize anyone from one meeting to the next. I was the only one at both. And I thought, there's a problem here, right? We've got this organization that's dedicated to delivering housing affordability, mostly on the rental side, right? And my model is ownership, and we'll get into that in a minute. And then I got this industry over here that's churning out homes, right? In Ontario, it's 60, 70, 80,000 a year. And the two aren't talking to each other. And so it was like, well, what can we develop where a nonprofit can interact with the for-profit development sector and bring housing affordability? So we've been exposed to, the share equity mortgage, which, lots of, there's a few organizations that were using it at the time, Options and Accès Condo in Montreal, and I can't remember the Calgary one, but, it was a tool that was out there. We were looking for a way to bring it to conventional developments. At the same time, it was the start of impact investing. So investors, mostly high net worth individuals and foundations who were taking the lead on this and saying, how can we put our money into something, get a financial return, but also do public good or meet the mission mandate that we have? And I thought, well, if we can develop something where we can bring those impact investors dollars to the housing field and deliver housing affordability, that would be fantastic. Developers are always looking to offset some of their risk and bring in investors. They would like to deliver more housing affordability within their developments if they could. So we came up with the Trillium model. So we started off with, we ended up with the initial 4 projects. And we went out to impact investors. I'll say thank you to Hamilton Community Foundation, Lawson Foundation, Real Estate Foundation in British Columbia, others who were willing to take a chance on us. We took the money and turned it into investments in housing developments. Now, it was tough to get the first developers on side. And initially we thought, hey, we'll just show up and say, hey, let us invest in your investments and in your projects, and let's move it forward. We pivoted a bit. At the same time, I did some advocacy with the provincial government around access to surplus land. The Ontario Nonprofit Housing, or the Ontario Nonprofit Association, the ONN, was working through the Open Door program that was in existence back then. And I convinced them that they should make that one of the asks, and we actually got it implemented. So as of, maybe 10 years ago, a nonprofit can register to see any surplus sites that are available from the province in their local municipality. And Trillium was, I think, probably the first one to register because I was quite keen on it. And we bought 3 sites from the province through that process. And so I could then go to a developer and say, hey, we have access to these sites. So one was in Pickering in the old Seton lands. 2 were in Hamilton. One was part of the old satellite city on the mountain that the province put together to build one of these model communities. And the other one was a piece of land next to the QEW in Winona that was just surplus to the construction. And then, with land in hand, and you'll remember 10 years ago, development was booming, and a model for affordability. We got interest from 2 developers that we knew from working with in the past, New Horizons, and Jeff Bacon runs that out of Hamilton, and Van Mar Constructors out of Guelph, led by Art Van Maren. And both of those organizations have definitely walked the talk by doing all sorts of different projects on the affordability side, and private, but also some quality affordable housing projects. So we got those first projects underway. The 4th site was actually in Toronto that we bought from Build Toronto, and but that was through a competitive RFP process. We paid the full. We had to compete and bid on the site, but it did come with some housing affordability funding as part of the offering. So with our model, we put in cash into the development. In all our projects, they were 50-50 partnerships, and the housing developer put some money into the nonprofit that we set up as the housing development entity. We do ownership projects that are targeted at the entry level of the local market. So we don't, I'm not interested in taking that site and building luxury homes. All our projects were all, either stacked or street townhouses. And out of the proceeds of the project, and, I should stop talking and let you ask questions about this, but out of the proceeds of the project, we take our investment dollars out when the units are sold, just like any housing development. And instead of having a profit, what we do is we turn that into Trillium mortgages. And the Trillium mortgages are a share equity mortgage. So there's no set interest rate on them. But critically is there's no regular payment. So you get the share equity mortgage, and you don't make any regular payments on that, principal or interest, until you either resell the house, then we get paid out, or you decide to become a landlord and you rent it out. That's a trigger to pay us. We're looking to help homeowners who live in their homes, not investors. So those are or voluntarily would be the third piece. And we get a lot of people who can, who save up some money and then pay us out sooner. So in our example, a family who otherwise would have had to finance, let's say they had 5% down, they would have had to get a 95% loan to value, and the mortgage insurance costs on top of that. We would give them at least the 15%, get them to 20%, so that they don't have to have the high-priced insurance or higher, and they can finance the balance of the purchase. In that example, 80%, or it might be lower if we give them a bigger Trillium mortgage. We right-size our Trillium mortgage to each family's personal circumstance, and then they buy the unit conventionally, and then they repay us. I'm kind of like Uncle Joe, right? I gave you a loan. You don't make any payments until you resell. And then when you resell, we get our share of the appreciation and the value of the home. So if my Trillium mortgage is worth 20% of the value of the home when you bought it, when you sell it, we'll get repaid plus 20% of any appreciation. which I think is pretty fair.
Yeah,
I'll take a breath while you ask me some questions. I feel like I'm talking too long.
No, it's a fascinating process, and you gave us the history. How many homes over the course of the last 10 years, affordable and truly affordable homes, have you provided?
So we're over 400 homes that have been built. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, we had no money. It was, 3 guys, bootstraps, got her done. And there was no lead kind of investment to get it launched. We thought this is the idea. It's going to work. We had some good feedback. So out of those 400 homes, we've got 2 projects sold out, completed, done. One project in Pickering, I think there's 3, it was 200 units. It has, I think, 3 units left. So anyone wants to look at buying a home in Pickering, we have a couple there. And then our last project in Hamilton is in sales closings right now. So we've closed, I think, about 2/3 of the units, and we've got about, I think there's 7 or 8 units left there, and there's Trillium mortgage funding too. So any of their listeners looking to purchase a home, I mean, we're not taking homeless people off. This is people who have to be, who will need to get a first mortgage to be able to afford, a portion of the value of the home. So that, that's, I should add, the real affordability comes with the Trillium mortgages. I think we're at 73 at the first 3 projects I mentioned. There's another 10 coming with the final project. So that's about $10 million in housing affordability that we're delivering. And like if you take it down to the individual, if we give someone $100,000 Trillium mortgage, they're saving over $500 a month on their housing costs. Wow. So that's substantial. We have Trillium mortgages at $200,000, where we're exceeding $1,000 a month reduction in their housing costs. So if they had gone out and added that $200,000 to their first mortgage, which they would have had to if they needed to buy, it would cost them $1,000 more a month. So so it's we're starting. That $10 million that we have in mortgages in people's hands right now is helping those 73 families, and feels good.
Oh, it's wonderful work. So walk me through. Let's say you were going to explain this to a class of grade 4s. You're saying, okay, so I'm going to come into a Pickering house. That house is worth how much? Normally, you'd have to put down 20%. But in this case, and if you didn't, and you put down 5, you pay that kind of premium through CMHC. In this case, you're putting down the 5. Trillium mortgage is covering the other 15. And so you're not paying the premium on that. And so your monthly costs are, as you say, much, much less than if you had to do something like that, right?
Exactly. So our first project in Toronto, it was 60 stacked townhouses. The project was called The Loop. It's up at, I'm snapping, Northwest Toronto. Nice little site. The average unit was priced at around $470,000. These are all 2 and 3 bedroom units. So we were able to give out 30 Trillium mortgages. So about half the families. So the average family buying a $470,000 unit, they'd have to put up 5% for, so let's say 20, 25,000 is the minimum that we require. They have to have skin in the game. We would give everyone at least a 15% Trillium mortgage because we wanted to get them over the 20% hump to avoid the high cost mortgage insurance. And basically our Trillium mortgage acts as the insurance in that case. And then they would have to go out and find that. So in that case, the average Trillium mortgage was about $100,000. So those families were having to get a first mortgage of about $300,000, $325,000, in that range. We were saving them over $500 a month because a $100,000 Trillium mortgage, that's at that time, the interest rate, it's probably more now, but at that time was about $500 a month. We were able to house families. The average income of our purchasers was $68,000. I don't know, if you know anybody who earned $68,000 a year, was able to buy a house 4 years ago or today or 10 years ago, like God bless them, they had saved up a lot of money because, it's just impossible. So, these families were not going to be able to buy in the market at that time. We'll make a special effort to help families where we think there's more need. 25% of our 30 buyers were single parent-led families.
So
What is
the
with a single parent.
Joe, talk to me about that. Like, how do you select? Because I'm sure you get a lot of interest, right? And you said this is really about helping people in home ownership, which is important. If people could, listen, if people come out of rentals into home ownership, that opens up rentals too for people in need of rental, right? So it works all around. But what is your process and how you select people?
So we really, we don't want any stigma attached to the development, and people to go, oh, that's where those people live. So when there's these townhouses are on the market, they're marketed just like any other townhouse. We have the sales center. All of that is exactly the same. We'll do some separate ads through like Google Ads online, and we will do signage, A-frame signs in the local area. And those A-frame signs are actually pretty effective. I have hesitated to go like on the radio because I've got 25, 30 units to do at the Loop. I don't have 10,000, right?
Yeah.
So, so now it's not easy. We had a few thousand registrants, and it was tough to get our 30 purchasers because they do have to meet, we'd have an income cap. We wouldn't want to go much over the local median income. So at that time, I think we were cutting it off at about 75,000. It's higher now at our current projects, mostly because of issues around the stress test and high interest rates and stuff like that. And they also have to but they have to have enough income to be qualified for a first mortgage. So it's not easy. You'd think we'd have a long lineup, but part of the reason that people don't know about us and the ones that do register, kind of across the board. So that's something I'm still working on to make it better. And I listened to your podcast looking for ideas on how to better target our housing affordability availability. So when somebody registers with us online, so if they go to trilliumhousing.ca, fill out our registration form, we'll look at, do they meet the basic parameters in that registration? And at that point, they go to our mortgage broker. We're working with HomeWise, which is an online broker. Great guys. Vince is fantastic. And Jesse, the owner, has been very helpful. And because it's online, it's been very efficient. And they will then go through submit all the normal documentations that's needed to get a mortgage originated. And once they have that first mortgage in place, then we assess what would their needs be for a Trillium mortgage, and then we look at what's the family size and composition. So what kind of unit size would be appropriate for them, and then we'll look at what we can finance to fill the gap. Then we have caps on what we can do, right? I can't do a 50% loan to value, so that again, it kind of narrows the field. But once we're settled, I mean, it's great. Those families can buy a home with a fairly good level of comfort that they can afford the payments that are set up.
Any success stories in particular jump to mind? Can you think of people? I mean, not name, but just that kind of sit with you where you felt really good about.
Yeah, I remember talking with one of the construction manager at the end of the project, and he was handing out the keys to families when they would come. So the sales closing we're having, this was in Toronto, and he said to me, Joe, said, this lady, she came to get her keys, and so I walked her over and showed her unit, and we open the door, I go in, and she stops at the door, and I turn around, and she's like crying. She's like, I can't believe this. And he was telling me the story, and I could tell at the time he was uncomfortable, right? It was like, well, what do I do? This person is upset, but they were tears of joy. And, she was like, I have 3 boys. There's no way I never imagined I'd own a home and have a place for them to grow up. And that was a nice sight. It was actually kitty corner from a public school. And there was a mall, Value Village and grocery store nearby, and the street or a bus line right there, and about a kilometer away from what will be the Eglinton LRT. So nice site in terms of a place for a family to grow up. So when I heard that story, that was special to know that those families that family and those 3 kids We're going to have a home, like the one I showed you on my painting for me, right, where they can grow up and have their place. So that was a pretty special story. I mean, there's other ones too, but.
And at that time, they were probably thinking only 3-4 years, and that new Eglinton, the LRT, will be rolling.
Okay, we're going down a different rabbit hole now.
That's a different story. But hey, listen, this is, I think, 10 years ago, Trillium Homes is very relevant. Now, more than ever. I mean, if you look at what is the average home over $1 million. So if you're going to do the 20% piece, you got to have $200,000 saved. Right now, to rent a 1-bedroom apartment in the GTA, you're looking at a household income of over $100,000, right? So most people have just stopped thinking about home ownership, and Trillium continues on, becomes more relevant, and is making home ownership a reality for many people who would never think that this could be. I'm going to be a renter forever, not thinking they could one day be showing their kids the picture you showed us. Right. And doing that. Now, what are the big plans for the future? Are you going to scale this up, or what's the future of Trillium?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, your comment. There are some big issues around all those families who can't afford to buy. The home ownership rate has gone down in Canada. I looked at some stats. I think it's gone from 69% to 63%. 3%. That sounds like nothing, right? There's 15 million households. That's 450,000 fewer homeowners. So when you said earlier, these families are moving out of rental units, well, that's 450,000 fewer people that in 2016 used to be homeowners, but now in 2023 aren't homeowners. And, a lot of those barriers, are making it really challenging for people to be able to move into home ownership, first-time home buyers in particular. And I'm thinking of like the stress test, which was brought in, 6-7 years ago, valid reasons, interest rates are 1 or 2%. Can they afford a hike? Well, we've had the hikes. We've had the greatest hikes ever, and everyone's saying they're going down, but the stress test is still at the same prime plus 2. Well, maybe we should modify the policy, make it prime plus 1, or make it higher for investors and lower for owner occupiers, and be a little more subtle and a little more specific about policies like this to help encourage people who need housing affordability and discourage the people that are driving up the prices because they're speculators and others like that. Pivot over to the future. We've been putting together an idea to I mentioned how we acquired land and got investors, and then end up issuing mortgages. And that process, I mean, the project I mentioned in Hamilton, right? That we still have 10 units for sale, and I welcome people to come and register. But we bought that. That was the first site we bought like 9 years ago. It's an infill site. We're building street towns next to existing street towns. 9 years. I'm too old to do too many of these projects, right? So the idea was, okay, how can we get more Trillium mortgages to more families faster? So we're building a Trillium mortgage fund. So we're going to look at the impact investors and the developers we're working with and say, put some money into this fund and we'll issue mortgages out of it. So we're not going to have the fund won't, the money available for Trillium mortgages won't grow from us doing developments and earning a profit and issuing it as profit. We're going to look for people to earn a return from the Trillium mortgages, the share equity, but more importantly, help a lot of families. So I'm really excited. We have 2 initial partners. So the Lakeview Village partners in Mississauga, who are redeveloping the old Ontario power generating site. That's a big project, 16,000 units. And they have an obligation to do about 5 or 10% of the units as affordable. So they want to work with us to do, some of those units, and are committing to put money into a fund where we'll deliver Trillium mortgages to buyers in that project, and that's multi-year. And then Spotlight Development, Sherry Larjani. There's somebody you should have as a guest, Michael. So Sherry's really wants to demonstrate how large sites could be redeveloped to include all types of housing models. So we're partnering to do affordable ownership there. She's got Wood Green Community Services, and I was on the board of Wood Green way back when, so they're going to do some rental. Good Shepherd, focused on seniors rental and more supportive. And we're looking to do that project. Habitat as well will do a few units. And again, demonstrate how if you have a site, out of the proceeds and using some of the support out of the profit of the for-profit units, so not all the units will be affordable, you can actually help defray costs on the affordable side and deliver a lot of units. So those two projects, I'm hoping we start issuing mortgage commitments this year at both of them out of the funds. And the funds are going to be structured so that impact investors could put money in the fund and fund directly the mortgages. So the time their money is in will be longer than a housing development. Housing development might be 5 years, right? 6, sometimes much longer. With the mortgage fund, what we're hoping to do is prioritize those types of investors to get them repaid out of the discharges earlier. So maybe after a 10-year period. And then organizations like Trillium and our developer partners will put their money in for a longer period of time, potentially getting repaid, in the 15, 20, 25-year range. So that structure, I think, could be very scalable. We've asked governments to be involved, mostly to help defray the risk, because if they can assume some of the risk, and it's not that risky because the mortgages are going to on existing houses. It's not like we're asking them to take real estate development risk. The houses are built, they've got a Terry on warranty. Help us defray the risk to have bigger investors. Potentially, I would love to see a pension plan or an insurance company who wants to look at long-term cash flow off of the housing sector, and this gives them a way to also get those CSI credits, in terms of what they're doing for their responsible investment. This would allow them to help a lot of families and still get a reasonable rate of return based on a risk that could actually be mitigated by government at low cost and help deliver a lot of affordability to a lot of households.
Amazing. And wonderful and well done. Big hopes for the future. What has to change? I mean, you've been, as you said in your intro, through the gamut of the political end of things, you're doing this work. You're obviously very committed to making housing more affordable and making life more affordable for Canadians. What do you think are some of the things that have to change to help us move through this housing crisis we face right now?
Yeah. When I look at the public policy stuff, a lot of it, I try to think, I don't think governments are going to build the housing, right? So, CMHC is not all of a sudden going to become a builder, and I don't think it should, and I don't think the province is either, and I don't think municipalities should be. That expertise is out there. So from my point of view, what needs to be done is the policy levers need to be shifted to incent developers to build the product we want them to build. So as an example, development charges in Ontario are a flat rate per unit. So in some places, it's like $100,000 for every unit you build. And it doesn't matter if I'm building a 2-bedroom unit with affordability, my DC is $100,000, or if it's, Trump Tower in downtown Toronto, and they're building a 2-bedroom unit, it's $100,000. They're selling theirs for, $1.5 million, and mine's $500,000. Same DC. That doesn't make any sense. When did we decide that we should tax people who can afford the $500,000 unit, the same dollar figure as the guy who can afford the $2 million condo? So change it to a rate, right? Raise the same money. Let's not debate how much money should be raised from DCs. That's another question. Raise the same amount, but instead of you doing a set $100,000, make it 5% of the price or 6%, whatever you need the rate to be to generate the income, and then apply that. So then on my $500,000 unit, it'll be substantially lower, right? And it'll be higher on the luxury unit. Well, when the developers run their pro formas and they look at those numbers, well, all of a sudden the lower priced unit becomes more profitable, right? and the other one less profitable. And if you can inch the ones on the margin to build more less costly units because the rate change, all of a sudden you're giving the developers the market signal to build more of the affordable units and less of the more expensive units. Sometimes I give the example, if you're approved to build a 10,000 square foot building, okay, you can build 5 2,000 square foot units, okay, and if it's $100,000 a door, that's 500,000 in DCs. Or your architect can build 10 1,000 square foot units. Your construction cost is the same for 10,000 units. But your DCs, when you build the 10 units, is going to be $1 million, right? 10 times 100,000 versus 500,000. So if they build the 5 units in the 10,000 square feet, they make $500,000 more in profit. Let's put aside that they need more parking and more bathrooms and stuff like that. But just on that number. So right there, if you're a developer, what are you going to do? I mean, Michael, you would build the 5 units and put 500,000 in your pocket, right? Who wouldn't blame them for doing that? I mean, they're business guys and they've got investors. They got to do it. So if you change the policy to at least make that neutral, or even better, for more expensive units, make the rate a little higher, and then really skew the table, you're giving the right type of market signals, right? And so, those are DC issues. That's like provincial and municipalities that would have to do those kinds of changes. But what you want to do is have the developers run their numbers and go, hey, it makes more sense to build a larger number of units in the same square footage, and that'll make us more money. I mean, they sell these units on a price per square foot. If you make the units a little smaller, right, we'll get lower priced units overall, and we'll have more of them. I mean, the average house size has grown over the last 30 years from about 2,000 square feet to over 2,500 square feet. And at the same time, average household size have shrunk. So why do our planning departments approve building these McMansions that are 2,500, 3,000 square feet? The picture of my house from when I was a kid, right? It's probably like an 1,800 square foot 3-bedroom house, right? With a basement, plus 1 basement bedroom where I slept. I was the oldest, right? You remember those houses?
Yeah.
So it was okay for me. I mean, it was a very comfortable house and a very nice house, and it was not 3,000 square feet. And, if you're building a subdivision of single family homes and you're building them at 3,000 per square foot or 2,000, well, you're going to build a lot more of 2,000s than 3,000. So why not have the planners approve it for the smaller lot sizes and the smaller homes?
Absolutely. Hey, what are your thoughts? I have to get your thoughts on one last thing before we close out. The federal government recently talked about going to kind of a catalog of a few different designs to say, if you use these designs, we're going to move that. It's going to go through that process a lot quicker. It'll be a lot more kind of affordable. It will get 5 million homes. We need a 3 million additional, but I think 5 million altogether past 2030. What are your thoughts about that catalog? Good idea?
Sure. I mean, I think the more we can do to streamline the processes, and if that means, doing some standardization, that's okay with me. I mean, at one point, there were different electrical currents depending on where you lived, right? And now it's a standard 110 volts. So it's kind of along there. I think the federal government, you brought them up, could do a lot more on other things, right? And I'll give you 3. I know we're almost on 3 quick things. So interest rates, right? They've been jacked like crazy. The number one item that's causing inflation in Canada is the impact of increased interest rates on people's housing costs, which everyone says is the number one issue. So there's lots of smart guys at the Bank of Canada. Figure out a way to keep the interest rates high for consumer spending. I don't need to go on a 5-star vacation. Let people to go on 4-star vacations because that's more affordable if they have to finance it, right? But find a way, the 250,000 first-time home buyers a year, they should not be penalized trying to get their first home, building equity in that home because of the interest rate hikes that have happened. So that would be one area that, the federal government needs to think hard, and it's not easy, but they need to do something. The HST first-time new home rebate was set up in 1991 at $350,000 is the price. You get a $6,000 rebate, and it's been frozen there, stuck in time in 1991. It's now 2023. It's like 32 years. Make the adjustment. Instead of giving a rebate of $6,000 on a $350,000 home, make it $600,000 home and give them a $12,000 rebate or higher. Make it, adjust it for inflation. But that's going to cost the federal government money, but it's a direct impact on home buyers, right? New home buyers. And then finally, CMHC, they gotta use the money that's given to them and get more effective. I always tell people, and Michael, you run a nonprofit. Nonprofits are to the housing sector what hospitals are to the healthcare sector. But tell me, do we treat our nonprofit housing providers the way we treat the hospital sector in Canada? No, it's not even close. So we need to change the mindset of the people that are really delivering affordable housing, and that's the nonprofits, and make sure that we're funding them properly and moving the barriers out of the way that can be moved out of the way to get the work done.
Well said, Joe. And we'll take those into mind. Now, listen, if someone wants to check out Trillium, they're interested in buying a house, they want to tell someone about it, maybe someone in Calgary who says, I'd love to scale it out here, or BC, or we'd love to take that idea, or a builder that wants to work with you. Maybe it's someone at Blue Door who's running a program called Construct who wants to reach out to you to say, maybe we could get our Construct program involved. How would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so the easiest to go to our website, trilliumhousing.ca. And the registration is there for a form for those who are looking to buy a home and see if they're eligible. Right now, to help families where the income's over $100,000, just because of interest rates and that. A family earning $120,000 cannot buy a home in the GTA, and we'll give them a big Trillium mortgage to help them buy in our Pickering and our Hamilton project. So that for those families, come register. Otherwise, our contact information for our organization is on the website as well. So, they can reach out to me at Trillium Housing, and we want to scale the work we're doing, and we're looking for avenues to do that. There's lots of families who, we didn't even talk about, first new Canadians, come to Canada looking at part of the dream of being a Canadian is owning their home. And there are a lot of barriers, a lot more so than I think for people that grew up in Canada to getting access to the housing market. And we need to find ways to help them to do that if we want to continue to have, I think, a nicely balanced communities where there's, a cross-section of housing that's available to everyone.
Absolutely. Listen, I encourage listeners, go to trilliumhousing.ca. Check it out. The website's wonderful. I took a look at it. Lots of kind of pictures there to kind of walk you through how the process works. Joe, thank you so much for stepping up for the 10 years of providing deeply affordable housing for homeowners, for continuing this work. It's so appreciated. We appreciate you sharing this with you, and hopefully we'll see Trillium Homes just continue to grow. Until next time, Joe, we'll see you next time on the way home.
Thanks.